Okay, so it has been a while since we last sat down and talked about Cable because we had a lot going on when it came to our coverage over the X-Men. We had Legion Quest, Age of Apocalypse, X-Men, Gene Nation. Like, there were a lot of different things going on. But here's the thing, because we're now going to dive back into more Cable comics. Now, we're going to cover at least 3 issues in this video. Here's the problem, though, because when it comes to issue number 21, it does technically take place before X-Force issue number 44, an issue we already had covered. In that issue, you had Cannonball leave X-Force and go ahead and join the X-Men, but also you had X-Force go ahead and move back in with the X-Men. So both teams are currently on the same base right now at the moment, but this issue alone does pick up before that issue right there. And so we'll cover issue number 21, but also issue number 22 and 23 that does take place after X-Force issue number 44. Now, technically, when it comes to Cable issue number 21, it does pick up where Legion Quest had left off at, but also where X-Men Prime number 1 had left off at. Let me explain. So, when it came to Legion Quest, as we all know, it was Legion going back in time to kill off Magneto because he believed Magneto was kind of standing in the way of Charles Xavier being able to reach his lifelong goal. Now, the problem was Legion did not kill off Magneto. He killed off Charles Xavier on accident. So with the death of Charles Xavier, the old timeline went away, but a brand new timeline came into the picture, Age of Apocalypse. Now, with that timeline right there, of course, as we all know, things were a whole lot darker, but thanks to Bishop, the old timeline came back. Here's the problem though. For our heroes, at first, they believed that they were going to die. The entire universe was going to die. And technically, they were right at first. But thanks to Bishop, everything was okay again. But before our heroes realized that they were given a second chance, you had Cable tell Domino how he truly felt. Now, when it came to X-Men Prime number 1, you had Cable and X-Force go back to their base. Now, the problem was their base at that time was an old base that belonged to a character known as Arcade, a super villain. And so once he realized that X-Force had basically took over one of his old bases, he said, you know what? I don't like that, and blew up the entire place. And so for X-Force right now, they no longer have a base. So they had no choice but to go ahead and move back in with the X-Men. And so as we get into Cable issue number 21, it's really more of us now seeing Cable kind of giving us a recap. Really, he's giving Domino a recap of everything I just told you, but he's also talking about the legacy virus. Now, technically, I'm not going to sit down and try to explain what's going on with the legacy virus for this video. Just know it's a huge plot line for all the X books around this time. But for Domino, she's kind of like, dude, there's no way you're going to sit here and try to give me a recap of everything that just happened to us recently. Now, for Cable and X-Force, they had just gone back to their old base, the same base that just got blown up. But their main goal right now is to see if they can find anything they can take home with them. Now, there is another plot line going on when it comes to X-Force comics, the whole idea that Siren is missing. Now, for X-Force, really every other member except for Warpath are not really worried for Siren because they're kind of like, listen, she's a grown woman and most likely she went away to take care of some business, but sooner or later she'll be back here to help us out. But for Warpath, kind of like, no, that's not like Siren at all. Something had possibly happened to her. Now, around this time in Marvel Comics, for Warpath, he was madly in love with Siren. And for Siren, it was kind of like, she might like Warpath, but not really, who knows? But either way, it does show that he is very concerned. Now, luckily for X-Force, they do find the Pack Rat. Now, the Pack Rat is the aircraft they basically use as a way to travel across the world. The problem is that it's technically buried underneath a bunch of debris. Now, Luckily for our heroes, Cable brought in some backup. Now, at first, we see Caliban because around this time in Marvel Comics, when it came to Caliban, he had just joined X-Force. Now, for Jean Grey, she's just there to help out. Now, with the powers of Jean Grey and Cable combined, they should be able to kind of clear all the debris off the aircraft and get it back in the air. Now, for Cable, we cannot forget that when he first appeared in Marvel Comics, he was not really trying to use his abilities. And matter of fact, he was trying to use his abilities as a way to keep the techno-organic virus from taking over his body. But over time, his abilities have evolved, where he's now able to kind of use part of his powers to keep the virus at bay, but also use his powers in different types of ways in the world around him. And so right now it's him trying to use his powers with Jean Grey to clear all debris off the aircraft. The problem is that he pushed himself to his limit. And so unfortunately, he does pass out. Now, for X-Force, they do share their concern with the idea of their team leader being down. Now, for Jean Grey, she was able to talk to Cable with her mind to wake him back up because with them being knocked out, the techno-organic virus was beginning to take over his body. And so when he does wake up, he goes right back into that leader role. So you know what, guys, I'm okay. Get to work. Let's get that aircraft back up in the air. Now, this is Jean Grey kind of realizing that for Cable, there's something going on with him. And technically, she's right because he's very concerned about so many different things. You got Domino, the woman he loves, X-Force, the team he loves, but also his son Tyler out there being a bad guy, trying to replace Apocalypse in the world. And so for Cable, there's so many things going on in this world. He has no idea how he can be able to handle all these different situations. Now, while you have X-Force trying to get the aircraft in the air, you do have somebody call out to Cable with his telepath ability. And so for Cable, he realized who's calling out to him by trying to connect to his mind. And that would be Blaquesmith. Now, Blaquesmith is a character that we had actually talked about in an earlier storyline we covered called X-Men Phoenix. Now, technically, X-Men Phoenix came out like 4 years after this issue did. But when it came to that storyline, it was the whole idea that you had Rachel Summers go into the far future. Now, when she did, she had technically built up a whole brand new organization known as the Ascani. Now, with the Ascani, their main goal was to guide the Chosen One. And the Chosen One was Nathan Summers, better known as Cable. As we all know, in X Factor Endgame, in that storyline, you had Apocalypse give young Cable the techno-organic virus. The only way to save him was to take him into the far future. Now, when they did that, over the years, you had the Ascani try their best to help out Cable in different types of ways. Unfortunately, they kind of failed multiple times. Now, there was another storyline where you had Cyclops and Jean Grey's souls go into the far future to kind of help raise Cable to a certain age. Now, there is a point in time where you had Cable in that far future and he had met Blaquesmith. Now, we had not technically talked about that storyline just yet. We're going to do it very soon on the channel, but for right now, just know that there was a point in the far future where you had Cable meet Blaquesmith. Now, when we had met Blaquesmith, he was a young boy who was with Rachel Summers. Now, with all that being said, in that far future, at first, it seemed like he was not a mutant. They gave him a test and said, you know what, you're not a mutant. But technically, he is one because he has psychic abilities. But either way, over the years, him and Cable were able to kind of build a bond with one another. But either way, both characters were sent back in time for different reasons. Now, for Blaquesmith, his reason is a whole complete different thing from Cable, and honestly, it's kind of messed up, but at the same time, he has to protect the future. And I'll explain more in the later videos when it comes to Cable. But for Domino, she knows that for Blaquesmith and Cable, they are very close to one another. And so she kind of sees that for Cable, he's very concerned about what's going on with Blaquesmith because Blaquesmith called out to Cable asking for help. And so you had Domino, Caliban, and Cable head over to where Blaquesmith is technically stationed at, some kind of old ship out in the middle of nowhere. Now, for Cable, once him and his team do arrive on that ship, unfortunately, they have to go through different types of traps just to be able to get over to Blaquesmith, which they do not really easily, but not too hard as well either. Now, once you do have our heroes being able to find Blaquesmith, the question is, who came here, who found Blaquesmith, and who had also attacked Blaquesmith? Now, once you do have Cable being able to talk to Blaquesmith, we do learn here that for Blaquesmith, he's really more of trying to reboot his computer system to hopefully figure out who had attacked the place. And that's the problem right there, because unfortunately, with all the security cameras in the actual ship, he's not really able to get a good picture of the person who had tried to attack the ship. And so until Blaquesmith computers are able to get a better picture, our heroes are not going to figure out who came after Blaquesmith. And most likely, if they did come after Blaquesmith, then most likely they're going after Cable as well. Now, for a brief moment, you do have Blaquesmith ask Cable, and of course in a telepath way of, does Domino remember anything at all? And apparently Cable says no, it's too dangerous for her to remember anything at all, kind of hinting at the idea that possibly Cable and Blaquesmith had done something to Domino in the past. The question is right now, what? But either way, for our heroes, knowing that Blaquesmith is okay, they leave his ship, but kind of hoping that sooner or later he could be able to get a better picture to figure out who had attacked him in the middle of the day. Now, the last page for issue number 21 is really more of us now picking up with Moira McTaggart and Rory Campbell. And the reason why, because they're kind of concerned about the idea of the legacy virus information being out there to the public. Because remember, for the X-Men, for the American government, their main goal is kind of keep the whole legacy virus hush-hush. But now the entire public knows about the legacy virus. And the question is right now, how in the world did that information get leaked out? And so for Moira McTaggart, she feels like the leak came from her lab. But the problem is right now, apparently there's something else tied into the whole leak that could affect Cable down the road. And the question is right now, what other information out there now that could possibly affect Cable down the road? Now, like I said at the very beginning of this video, Cable 21 took place before X-Force number 44, but issue number 22 and 23 does take place after issue number 44 for X-Force, because we do pick up at the airport. Now, I should tell you guys right now, the entire issue number 22 does take place at the airport in New York, but really on a plane towards New York, we do pick up with a character known as Renee Maj Combe, and I really hope I pronounce that last name correctly. Now, for Renee, we met her in the earlier parts of our coverage over the X-Men. She was a minor character back then, because the whole thing was when it came to Genosha, after you had the original government leave, you had a new one try to step in. She was trying her best to kind of help with the new government, especially when it came to fighting against Fabian Cortez. Now, with all that being said, we currently see her trying to sneak into New York, sneak into the US, so that she'll be able to meet up with Charles Xavier, which also means she snuck out of Genosha. And you'll see what I mean later on in this issue right here of why I'm saying she snuck out of Genosha. But on her way over to New York, we see her kind of freaking out because she's kind of wondering, will she be able to enter the US with a fake passport? But while her flight on the way over to New York, we see Cable and Domino arrive at the airport. Now, they're not really there for Renee at all. They're there for a different reason. But like I said, this entire issue is kind of focusing on the airport. So they had to bring in Cable and also Domino into the airport for another reason. And that reason is Richter. And when it comes to Richter, he was part of so many different teams when it came to X-Men comics. New Mutants, X-Force, there was another team, I think, but I forgot what team name was. But either way, when it comes to Richter, by this point in Marvel Comics, he's leaving X-Force. And so it's him saying, you know what, enough is enough. I'm tired of being an X-Men character. Let me just go ahead and go back home to my family. And so you have Richter and also Shatterstar arriving at the airport. Now, for Shatterstar, he's not leaving the team. He is staying because, well, he wants to. But also, it's him just saying goodbye to Richter because Richter and him are best friends. Now, for Shatterstar, it's also him trying to convince Richter to not leave the team at all, to stay here with the rest of X-Force. But unfortunately, Richter does not want to. Now, for Renee, as she arrives into New York, it looks like everything's working out for her. As she tries to go inside the airport, we do see that, well, you have two people who are also from Genosha who are trying to follow her at the moment. And so for Renee, her main goal right now is to hopefully continue on, and she has no idea that technically she's being followed by two people from Genosha who plans to bring her back over to the country. But switching back over to Richter and also Shatterstar, when they do arrive at the gate for Richter's flight, they're confronted by Cable and Domino. You see, for Domino, she wanted to bring Cable here to give Richter a proper goodbye, but to also build the bond between these two characters. You see, for Richter, for a good while in Marvel Comics, the dude did not like Cable, and the reason why, because he believed that Cable had killed off his father. But in reality, Cable was actually innocent. It was Stryfe, the clone of Cable, who had killed off the father of Richter. Now, once you have Richter learn the actual truth, everything kind of worked out between the two characters. They were kind of building that bond. And so it's Cable saying like, hey man, listen, I want you to stay with X-Force, but I understand you need some time away to be with your family. And I'm also hoping that while you're gone, you find what you're actually looking for. And so it's Cable and Richter saying goodbye with the possibility of Richter returning to X-Force alongside with the rest of the old team. But Richter's now gone. And so you now have Cable, Domino, and Shatterstar just at the airport watching Richter fly away. But right after you have Shatterstar's flight leave, you then have a crowd of people outside begin to freak out. And the reason why, because they were out there protesting, because they hated the idea of people from Genosha coming over to America. Because when it came to the legacy virus, for X Factor, they had discovered that there was a huge amount of cases in Genosha. Now, at first, everything was kept hush-hush. But again, thanks to Trish Tilby, everything came out to the public. And so for the people of America, they're freaking out right now because now they know of the possibility of the virus being able to go after humans, not just mutants. So now you're allowing these different members of Genosha to come over to America to possibly spread the virus. And so now those people are no longer just peaceful protesting, they're now beginning to riot. And so that kind of leads into the rest of issue number 22, because you do have Cable, Domino, and also Shatterstar kind of want to see what's exactly happening at the airport. But then you have Cable realize that Renee is being kidnapped by two people who kind of work for the Genosha government. And so with that being said, for Cable, he ignores the crowd of people who are rioting and tries his best to save Renee. Now, you also have Domino and also Shatterstar helping out with this situation. Now, unfortunately for Shatterstar, he does get shot multiple times, but he's okay technically. Like at the end of the book, he does get taken over to the medical bay at the school of Charles Xavier to get some medical help. But either way, you do have Cable and Domino being able to take down the two people who are trying to kidnap Renee. Now, for Renee, she tells Cable that she's only here to talk to Charles Xavier. And so she's going to leave for the time being to kind of hide. But she says she'll call Charles sooner or later about something very important. It's being very vague. We're not really learning why she's actually here in America for just yet. But for Cable, they got to leave because, like I said, Shatterstar got shot multiple times. He needs some medical help. Now, later on the night, you do have Domino watching TV, and this kind of leads into the next issue. But for Domino, while watching TV, she sees Trish Tilby once again reporting on some big news, where apparently there is a serial killer in the Rocky Mountains. But here's the catch, because at first they believe it was a human, but then it said, you know what? It could be a mutant or some kind of wild beast. And the reason why, because they found a footprint. Now, for Domino, she does recognize the footprint very well, and so she begins to freak out. And this brings in a character we have not really talked about since the early parts of our coverage over Cable. Now, as we switch over to Cable issue number 23, we actually pick up with Cable, doing a different form of meditating. But of course, from this culture he grew up in as the Askani. Now, when it comes to Cable, while he's trying to meditate, he is then confronted by Storm. Now, we're getting a call back to an earlier storyline that took place literally prior to Age of Apocalypse, where you had Domino, Storm, Cable, and also Caliban fight against Cable's son, better known as Tyler, or now known as Genesis. Now, for Cable, he kind of remembers what his son did in a city over in Egypt. It was a complete massacre. And so for Storm and Cable, they kind of feel like bigger things are going to happen very soon to all the different X characters. But while they're talking, you have Cable say, I had just received a postcard. And the thing is, it had my real name on there, Nathan Dayspring. But the problem is, there are not that many people out there who know my real name. And so for Cable, he feels like it's Tyler calling out to him. Now, for Domino, you have her head over to the Rocky Mountains. Her main goal is to figure out what's actually happening over there in the Rocky Mountains, because she feels like the crazy beast or the actual serial killer out there might be somebody she knows. Now, while she's out there, she does find another footprint. And with this footprint, it kind of tells her like, okay, yeah, I think I know who might be out here killing all these different people in the Rocky Mountains. Now, while you have Domino doing that, for Cable, he begins to talk to Charles Xavier. Now, here's the thing, because for Tyler, we have to remember that, yes, he's calling himself Genesis, but also he's trying to replace Apocalypse at the moment. Because with Apocalypse not being around or in the picture at the moment for the X-Men, the door is open for anybody to try to take their spot. Now, here comes the big problem, because for Cable, he does tell Charles Xavier that Tyler is Jen Scott's son. Now, Jen Scott is a very important character because that is the mother to Tyler, of course, Cable's old wife, who had died in the earlier parts of our coverage over the X-Men. And you have Charles realize, he's kind of like, wait a second, you didn't say your son, you said Jen Scott. Like, he's not your son at all. That right there is kind of strange. Now, for Charles Xavier, he kind of realized that Cable wants to see if Charles is able to use his ability to find Tyler somewhere across the world. But as Charles saying, dude, there is 3.5 billion people across the world. It is very hard for me to kind of pinpoint just one person. So unfortunately, I'm not really able to help you. Now, for Domino, we kind of begin to learn like who she's trying to find. And we kind of find out that it's somebody who is very close to her and also Cable. Somebody who was part of the Six Pack when you had Cable first appeared in the past. And that would be Grizzly. Now, we had saw Grizzly in the earlier parts of our coverage over Cable, where you had G.W. Bridges try to use Grizzly and other people as a way to capture Cable. But it has been a while since we last saw Grizzly, but apparently something is going on, something to kind of possibly turn him into a serial killer. And so for Domino, she goes to his home. Now, at first, she does not find anybody at home, but she realized, you know what, let me go ahead and investigate to make sure that one, he's okay, but two, he's not some kind of serial killer. Now, you do have Cable go pay a visit over to Blaquesmith. Now, This is where we kind of begin to learn that there is some kind of bigger picture going on when it comes to Cable and also Blaquesmith. And let me explain here, y'all, because you do have Cable going to Blaquesmith to kind of ask for his help to figure out where in the world Tyler could possibly be at. But it's also Cable kind of saying like, hey, listen, Blaquesmith, I see a map of Europe. I want to know who is possibly tracking you down. Now, for Blaquesmith, he's not trying to tell Cable anything at all, kind of hinting at the idea that he's hiding something. And also is Cable telling us that something happened in the past between these two characters in the far future. The question is right now, what? And so is Cable saying, I'm trying my best to trust you. Now, you do have Blaquesmith say, hey, listen, if you are trying your best to find your son, why don't you try to figure out where he's actually working out of the most? Like, try to find his main computer to see that if there has been any activity on that main computer that could possibly help you to figure out where he is at. Now, right after you have Cable leave, you then have Blaquesmith being able to contact the mother of Scotty. Now, remember, the mother of Scotty is Rachel Summers, who went into the far future and, of course, became this great warrior who fought against Apocalypse, but also began a brand new organization. And so it was her who kind of sent Blaquesmith back in time, but it's also her kind of saying like, listen, I know you're worried for Cable, but at the same time, his trials are not done yet, and he is the chosen one. Now, we do jump back over to Domino. When it comes to Domino, you have Domino walk into the attic of Grizzly's home. And as she does that, she finds all the dead bodies to confirm that, yes, the serial killer is Grizzly. But things get even crazier because you didn't have Grizzly appear right behind her, and you have Domino pull out that weapon. So we're kind of left to believe the next chapter is going to be Domino versus Grizzly. But before we dive into that chapter, you see, we then jump back over to Cable because as we do, we now see Cable trying to locate Tyler, except while trying to do that, he finds somebody, but it's not Tyler. You see, he finds Jen Scott, his dead wife, Tyler's mother. So it's kind of like, wait a second, how in the world is she alive again? Because we saw in an earlier storyline that she was dead, but somehow she's alive again. You know what? I know I said earlier, really at the very beginning of this video, that I'm only covering issues number 21, 22, and 23. You know what? Let's go ahead and cover the last two chapters of this storyline. So picking up with issue number 24 now. We begin to see that battle between Grizzly and also Domino. Now remember, for Grizzly, he was a close friend of Domino, a co-worker, a teammate. So for her, she kind of knows all his different moves, but at the same time, he knows all of her different moves as well. Now the thing is, he's trying to tell Domino like, hey, listen, something or someone has control over me. Technically, someone. And he knows who that person is, but he's having a hard time telling Domino who has control over his mind at the moment. But while you have Domino dealing with that, for Cable, he's trying his best to figure out how in the world his wife is alive again, because she died in the earlier parts of our coverage. Now for Blaquesmith, the way he's kind of acting is kind of like he knew sooner or later she would be here. And he knew sooner or later that technically she'll have to be used as a way to kind of help Cable on his path in his life. And so you have Blaquesmith being able to wake her up. But after doing that, she begins to talk to Cable and also Blaquesmith with the idea of she came here to this point in time to help out a certain person, better known as Nathan Dayspring. Now, technically, that is Cable. But when she looks at Cable, she does not recognize it's actually him. And so it's kind of like, okay, maybe, just maybe, because she time travel is kind of affecting her mind at the moment. Now, the battle for Domino and also Grizzly, as it continues on, it gets worse and worse. And the reason why, because we get to that point where, unfortunately for Domino, she no longer has a choice here. She has to kill off Grizzly because if she doesn't, then most likely he will continue to come after her and kill other people in this area. But before she pulls that trigger, you have Grizzly tell Domino, like, hey, listen, this is the person who is currently trying to take over me, who's controlling my mind, and his name is Tyler. Of course, the son of Cable. And so now it shows that it's Tyler trying to mess with Cable any types of ways he can. But unfortunately for Domino, she has to kill off Grizzly to hopefully stop him. But he says, please, please do not tell Cable that it was his son who basically got me killed. But for Domino, she has to tell Cable because Grizzly is now dead. Now, the rest of issue number 24 is really more of us kind of figuring out what's going on with Jen Scott because, yes, she just time traveled, but she has no idea who Cable is. And here's the reason why, because she did not meet Cable yet as an adult. Let me explain. This is a past version of Jen Scott from the future, an earlier part in the future where she had time travel back in time to find Nathan Dayspring, Cable, to bring him back into her part of timeline in the far future to save a younger version of Cable who got sick the day before a big battle against Stryfe. And so that is why she has no idea who Cable is because she never met an adult version, but at the same time for Nathan, he's like, I don't remember her time traveling at all. And the reason why, because this is a past version of her before they had officially met and got married. But either way, to save his future self, he has to go back into the future to an earlier time when he was young to help his younger self survive so that he'll then be able to take on a battle against Stryfe. And so you have Cable and his wife teleport into that point in time in the far future. But the thing is, they're not the only people going to time travel because we also pick up with Domino. And with Domino, well, she's also going to time travel because you have Blaquesmith contact her with his telepath abilities. And so once he does, he begins to teleport her, most likely, into that same future that Cable and his wife had just went into. Now, for Cable and also Jen Scott, when they do arrive in the future as we dive into issue number 25, it's really more Cable kind of realizing here he has to be very careful because if he tries to do anything that changes the past, it will change the future dramatically, which of course, the past, the present day for the X-Men could also be affected as well. And so for Cable, he has to make sure that he does everything he needs to do without trying to change much here in his point in time. Now, while you have the two characters arriving into the future, they kind of realize that, well, they're in the area that belongs to Stryfe. So they have to do their best to sneak out of this area over to the camp of the Ascani. Now, while they're trying to do that, Domino also arrives. Now, for Domino, she does learn very quickly here that one, they're in the future, but two, you have Domino realize there's some kind of connection between Cable and Jen Scott. Now, she heard about Jen Scott, but it's Cable not telling her like, hey, this is Jen Scott, because Cable never Cable never showed Domino what Jen Scott looked like. And so right now she's kind of like, okay, cool, we're in the future, I'm with Cable and some random woman who appears to be very close to Cable. What in the world is going on here? But after a while, you didn't have Cable call her by her name, Jen Scott. And for Domino, she's like, wait a second, that is your wife. What in the world is going on here? Now, for Cable, he's not really able to explain everything to Domino at the moment. And the reason why, because, well, they're currently in the territory of Stryfe. And for Cable, he has to use his powers to kind of cloak them so they're able to escape this area and get back over to the camp that belongs to the Ascani. Now, for Stryfe, we see him right now in the moment. And matter of fact, he's torturing one of the members of the Ascani, and that would be Tetherblood. Now, here's the thing, because for Tetherblood, they believe, or the Ascani believes, that he is a traitor. But in reality, he is not. He was just captured, and currently, he's sharing most of the information that he knows about a special item that belongs to the Ascani son, of course being Cable, the younger Cable. And so right now we're kind of left to believe that the reason why Cable in this point in time is weak at the moment because of some special green orb. Now, we are going to learn more about this green orb here in a moment, but the thing is, young Cable needs that orb apparently to possibly survive. Now, for Cable and Domino and also Jen Scott, they do arrive at the camp that belongs to the Ascani. Now, once they do arrive, you have Cable kind of tell Domino they have to be careful here because they're now meeting different people who were part of Cable teams over the years. But also, when they look at Cable, they're kind of like, wait a second, you look like an older version of our current leader at the moment. And that will be himself, just a younger version. Now, for Cable and Jen Scott, they go inside the tent to see the younger version of Cable, while you have Domino stay behind to have a conversation with Blaquesmith because she believes Blaquesmith at this point in time might know more about why in the world she is here for. Because yes, Cable makes sense, and so does Jen Scott, but why is Domino here for? And so you have Cable meet his younger self. The problem is for Cable, he doesn't know what to do here to actually help out his younger self. And so for him, he said, you know what? Let me go ahead and just enter the mind of my younger self. But that's a problem right there because for young Nathan, as soon as Cable goes into his mind, he thinks it's Stryfe right now trying to enter the mind of Cable. Oh, by the way, real quickly, I should explain that in this part of the timeline, Apocalypse is no longer around. Instead, you have Stryfe being that person who had replaced Apocalypse and trying to be the new ruler of the entire world. Anyways, though, as soon as Cable tries to enter the mind of his younger self, you have young Nathan attack Cable. And so Cable said, okay, you know what? I can't do that idea right there. I need to think of a different game plan that's going to help him out. And so for Cable, he said, by this point in time, young Nathan should have a special friend next to him. And so you have Cable reach out to that person. And we kind of find out it is the professor. But the professor was that green container that Stryfe currently has. Now, just in case we do have anybody just joining our coverage over the X-Men, let me briefly explain who the Professor truly is. So, many years ago, you had a Celestials create this spaceship that had crashed on Earth. Now, the point of the spaceship was to collect data on the Earth. Now, the entire ship was being run by an AI system, better known as the Professor. Now, there was a point in time where you had Apocalypse being able to find a spaceship, and you had Apocalypse being able to use the spaceship for his own personal reasons. Now, after a while, many years later, you had X-Factor being able to get rid of Apocalypse and then take over the actual ship. Now, after that, many years later, you didn't have the ship be turned into a AI system better known as the Professor, who came very close to Cable. Matter of fact, they were connected to one another. Now, there are a few more missing pieces in that storyline, but that's the whole brief idea about the Professor. And so by this point, the Professor should be part of Cable or young Nathan. The problem is right now that AI system is not with young Nathan. It's with Stryfe at the moment. Now for Domino, she's still questioning Blaquesmith. The problem is this is a different Blaquesmith. The one she talked to in the past and her present day is an older Blaquesmith who had traveled back in time. This Blaquesmith is young and still has not traveled back in time yet. So he has no idea why in the world Domino is here for. But he does believe she's here for a special reason. Now for Domino, she believes that she's here to break the cycle. The whole idea of, you know what? If I kill off Stryfe at this point in time, then most likely Cable will finally be happy. He'll have Jen Scott. He'll have Tyler. He'll have everything he wants to have so badly. But the problem is, if you change one point in time that you are not supposed to change, it can change almost everything for the entire timeline. And so for Cable, while you have him telling the Ascani, hey, listen, we're going to attack Stryfe in the morning, you have Cable realize Domino is missing. Because you have Domino trying to kill off Well, Stryfe. So she has a gun pointed at him from the distance. Now you do have Cable being able to stop her, but it's Cable telling her like, listen, you can't change the timeline. Like if you do, it could make things a whole lot worse or possibly better. You don't know, but that's a risk we cannot actually take. Now the problem is Cable and Domino are now in the territory that belongs to Stryfe. And so you have the Ascani by Cable and also Domino enough time to be able to sneak into the tent to figure out what's going on with Stryfe. Now for Cable and Domino, they're able to sneak into the tent of Stryfe where they do find the professor, but they also find Featherblood as well. Now they realize he is not the traitor. Matter of fact, it's a different person known as Corliss. Now I'm not going to sit down and try to explain who Corliss is, just know the dude actually believed that Stryfe is the better option for the world. The Ascani son and the Ascanis should all be killed off. And so you do have Cable and Domino being able to body slide at the very last second thanks to the professor. And so unfortunately, Corliss failed as a traitor of the Ascani because, well, Cable and Domino were able to get away with the professor. And really, the rest of this storyline gets wrapped up with Cable taking the professor back over to young Nathan and also Blaquesmith. So with the professor now being part of young Nathan, he is perfectly okay, which also now allows Cable and also Domino to go back to their point in time in the very far past. Now, here's one last thing though, because for Cable, he now once again has to say goodbye to his wife because he knows sooner or later, she's going to die in his arms down the road. But either way, it's him again saying goodbye to the woman he truly loved. And the book ends on that note with Cable and Domino going back into the past while you have young Nathan get back up and getting ready to lead the Ascani against, well, good old Stryfe. But this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.